Do you have an exceptional memory? Because if you do, then you might remember that I made a build a while back. This was around level 80 or 90, and this build was named Prisoner Number 81609 or something along those lines. And the premise of the build was I was using Regalia of Eocade and Bloodflame Talon, Dragon Claw, some arcane spells, right, with some faith. And I had been talking about how I wanted to remake that build at a higher level and to use the Marius Executioner Sword. I knew when I saw that weapon, I was like, oh yeah, definitely want to make a build around this weapon. Seems cool. So the premise for the build would be, if the low-level version of the build that used Regalia of Eocade was, this prisoner who had escaped, then the high-level version of the build would be this, bounty hunter who was chasing after that character who had escaped. So the fashion for the prisoner character, you're kind of seeing it here. The hood of the guilty, and I put it on the vulgar militia chest piece because it covers up that gross bib. There's like a gross bib if you're wearing the hood of the guilty. It's got this bib on it, and I hate it. But the vulgar militia chest piece gets rid of that, which was nice. And so I went that route. And, the shield that I used was the pillory shield, which looks like a stockade. Like the character had turned a stockade into a shield. And I thought that was pretty cool. And that build was around level 90. And so another thing that I'd been thinking about was I make all these builds that are spellcasters. And it's like, okay, this guy's a fire guy. He casts all the fire spells. This guy is a lightning guy. He casts all the lightning spells. This is a person that casts all the beast incantations, right? And so forth and so on. I make the builds, they're centered around the idea of being that type of spellcaster. But I have always wanted to make a build that doesn't have to rely on any of that. Also, I have a madness guy. I've wanted to make a build that was just sort of like, I'm going to cast whatever the hell I want. And so I saw here the perfect opportunity to do that. So we've got the Marius Executioner Sword, and we've got all these spells, and we've got a bunch of arcane, and we have some faith. They're pretty close to even. I think it's like 50 arcane and 45 faith is what I ended up running. For the final version of the build. This bit of a bummer. My PlayStation corrupted a bunch of clips that I had for this video, unfortunately, as I was making it. There might be a way for me to get those back? Question mark. I remember this happened once previously, and I was able to get those clips, and I was able to restore them, basically. But I have a bunch of really great clips that I just can't do anything with. Which kind of sucks. But I went to New Game Plus, and I got that second Dragon Communion Seal. I also went into New Game Plus, and I got Millicent's Winged Sword Insignia. So in New Game, I got Millicent's Prosthesis, because this build doesn't need any dex. Having 5 decks gets me, I think, like exactly where the Marius... No, it's where the Regalia of Eocade. The Regalia of Eocade is 18 dexterity. This build has 13 dexterity to start off with. I started Vagabond, but I looked at the numbers in the calculator, and you could start with like Vagabond, Prophet, I think Hero, and I think there was one other class, and they all end up the same. So I went to level 165. I wanted this build to be able to invade level 150, and I wanted this build to be able to invade up towards level 200. So 150 where the gankers hang out, and 200 where the honest co-opers, kick around. And so I wanted this build to be able to have like both of those things. And it's worked out pretty well. It's a huge difference when I am streaming versus when I am just playing the game myself. The number of ganker to regular co-opers that I get, or like grace duelists, right? Gankers, grace duelists. When I'm streaming, I get a lot more of that. But if I'm just hanging out playing the game by myself, that falls off dramatically, and I get a lot more of those honest, over-leveled, New Game Plus co-opers. So, like I said, I went into New Game Plus to make sure I had all that combo stuff. And the reason I did that was because this build has Dragonclaw. And Dragonclaw can proc Millicent's the Winged Sword Insignia, as well as Millicent's Prosthesis. It can proc those buffs. And then all of your other spells start doing more damage, right? And I knew I was going to use the Mariah's Executioner Sword, and that also obviously procs those buffs. And so what ends up happening is at some point you'll proc those buffs, and then you start casting spells, and now your spells are doing like boatloads of damage. And it's really, really fun. You have to play stupid, but you're rewarded for your stupidity by just a tremendous amount of damage, just way too much damage. And that's just kind of the whole premise of the build. And the original video that I was going to make for this build was me doing all of the stuff that's not fun at the start. And when I say not fun, I mean to me personally. I had clips of me just like melting people with Catch Flame. I had pictures of me just melting people with Mariah's Executioner Sword. I had pictures of me chasing after people with the Ripple Halberd, and I put the sleep grease on it. I had clips of me just spamming Bestial Sling at people who would not, people who are trying to be like duelists in invasions, and they're trying to like quote unquote outspace or like play footsies, but they're actually just being passive as all hell. And the point of all that stuff was like, this is not a build for that. This is not a build that does that stuff. But it is a build that can do that stuff. I don't want it to be, but it can do all that stuff. This build is silly and goofy, but if you want to, you can play it like an absolute jerk. That's... like, I'm still gonna try and do silly stuff with this build, even if my opponents are like playing super boring, unless they, for whatever reason, tick that little annoyed button in my brain that makes me annoyed, and then this build can just go back to being an absolute jerk. So after patch 1.10, Mariah's Executioner Sword and the Blade of Eocade, or Eocade's Dancing Blade, both of them are in a much better place as far as their Ashes of Wars go, because they do combo better than they used to. It doesn't always true combo into the whole Ash of War, but you'll get much more out of it than you used to get during like patch 1.08 and 1.09. So the weapons are kind of back, so this was a good time to make this build as well. The Flame of Frenzy is another spell that is just absolutely good. It's especially good against players who want to play like quote-unquote footsies in Elden Ring, the game with no walls or borders of any meaningful way. You know what I'm saying? Like, one of the key elements of a fighting game is the fact that you can't literally walk away for 100 hours worth of RPG content, right? Sub-Zero and Scorpion cannot just back up for 100 hours of content, starting from Limgrave and ending up in, Liurnia. It's just, right? That's an important part. So when people play the game that way, the Flame of Frenzy is beautiful. at basically just like punishing people who are playing too passively. It just shoots weird patterns of fire that can do very real damage, especially, you know, using the Dragon Communion Seal. But you'll notice in some of these videos that I do have the Frenzied Seal, and I use that if I have to. I will put that in my right hand if I need to. I also have the Beast Seal, the one that you get from Garunk, the one that scales with faith and strength. And I don't have a lot of faith on this build. You know, it's like 25 or something like that. It's just enough to use the Marius Executioner Sword. You know, I can use that if I'm just going to be spamming Bestial Sling, or, you know, the Rock Throw, whatever the hell that's called. These situations are few and far between, but, you know, they do come up occasionally. For the most part, though, I'm just dual-wielding the two Dragon Communion Seals, because, you know, I've got all this Arcane, the Dragon Communion scales with Arcane better than Faith, so, you know, that works. But keep in mind that it's a dual seal. It's a dual stat incantation seal. So, like, if you were playing an intelligence build, you would just want to go 80 intelligence, right? With this build, it's a little different. Like, why not just go 80 Arcane? Because the results would be worse than going 50 Arcane and 40 Faith, right? The math is a little different because it scales with two stats. Whereas, you know, like if you were doing this with an intelligence build, most intelligence builds are just like, yeah, this thing scales with your intelligence. So, sorcery builds, I guess I should say. But yeah, so you make a sorcery build, your staff is just scaling with intelligence. So yeah, just level it up to 80, and there you go. But this build, I wanted to use those spells that required Arcane, and so, you know, let's use that. And the sort of opening gambit of this build is Dragonclaw. You can see I've got Grail's Roar, I've got Bloodflame Talon, I've got all these different spells. And I'm playing around with stuff that I've never played around with before. I did a few invasions with Plasudisac's Ruin. I've never used that. But a lot of these are spells that I enjoy, and I use them on other builds. And this build is sort of designed to do what all of my other builds do. So, like, some of my builds have true combos that they run off of a landing Stone of Garunk. Some have combos that they run off of Bloodflame Talon. Some of my builds have combos that they run off hitting O Flame. And this build can do all of those, and that was kind of the fun part. And keep in mind that this is like, you know, I have spells that I consider good over spells that I consider worthwhile. Like, a really good spell to have on this build would be like Giant's Flame Take. So basically you could build up that damage with the combos and then just throw Giant's Flame Take Thee and, you know, do 60 billion damage with a Giant's Flame Take Thee. But I don't put that on the build because that's not what I'm trying to do. So, like, I have Catch Flame on the build and I have, like, Bestial Sling on the build. And those are like, okay, you're kind of making me have to use this, right? But it's not what I'm after. And like Giant's Flame Take Thee, it just deletes people, you know, sort of as is. So like, it would just also delete people with, you know, this build. But I don't want clips of that. I don't want clips of that to put on YouTube. I want clips of like using Ancient Dragon Lightning Stake, you know, and Grail's Roar, and Dragon Maw, and, you know, all these weird things that I can do. Because magic in Elden Ring, sorcery or incantation, like, no matter what you like, it's really, really fun in this game. And I love that. And so, like, I'm, you know, like, I want this build to be a good time. But it's funny that incantations are so good that you're like, oh, I want this build to be a good time, but it can still be an absolute nightmare to deal with. Somebody just like chasing after you with Catch Flame or Bestial Sling. Oh, you're going to try and heal? Okay, well, I'm going to do 1,800 damage with Mariah's Executioner Sword, And, I like that. I like that it has that. I used to do these invasions back in Dark Souls 3 where I would cosplay as enemies in a certain level. And, they were just sort of like fun for me. I felt like I was good enough at Dark Souls 3 invasions that I could get away with doing that against my average opponent. But I started to recognize that, like, my opponents would, it felt like I was running into the mean opponents when I was running that silly stuff. So I always started keeping a loadout that was like, okay, if I run into really mean gankers, I can switch to this other loadout. And it sort of became a Saint Riot staple, where I'm like, yeah, you can make a fun build, you can make a cute build, but you should also have like some real damage on your cute build, which was like I carried that over in Bloodborne invasions. If you're doing low mid-level Bloodborne invasions, like level 40 to level 60 or 70, you invade in Bloodborne and you're just killing people in 1 or 2 hits because your weapon is fully upgraded and has all these really nice blood gems in it. And so, like, I started keeping weak weapons on my build. Like, I would keep like a +6 variant of all my weapons on my Bloodborne builds. That way I wasn't doing, nuke damage, but I still had the nukes on me in case I needed them for invading people who had also done, chalice dungeons or whatever. They had a very high level password summoned friend who could kill me in 2 hits. Okay, well, I'm going to kill you in 2 hits, and sort of like a mutually assured destruction type of thing. But this build does that. Like, it just has it built in, and I really like that. It has access to this like really good stuff, but it can also make all these cool clips. Hopefully, you're enjoying the clips that I'm showing off here today, because these were the clips that I really liked. I really enjoyed. You can do some really fun stuff with a build like this, and I absolutely love it. I made this build, and it's sort of like I made this build, and I have an intelligence version of this build. A build that is an Arcane intelligence build. And I know that it will please some of you all who have been in my comments for a long time asking for a certain type of spell from me. Okay, well, all right. Anyway, the point is I made these 2 builds right before Armored Core came out. The intelligence build isn't done yet. It's nowhere near done yet. But Armored Core came out, and there's another game coming out called Sea of Stars. And I'm very much looking forward to playing that. If you don't know, it's an RPG, but it's a very old school inspired RPG. So I'm going to be playing Armored Core, and I'm going to be playing Sea of Stars. And once I get done with those 2 games, I'll go back and I'll finish the intelligence build. But it's kind of nice to be able to sort of take a little break from Elden Ring and play some other games. I am loving Armored Core. I'm uploading the videos here to YouTube. I've heavily edited them to put them in like 40-minute blocks where you're mostly getting, just good progress from the start of the video to the end of the video. So, hopefully y'all will enjoy that. If you don't enjoy it or you don't care about Armored Core, just sit here patiently and wait. Because I'm not going to rush this intelligence Arcane build. Just don't feel like it. Don't feel like rushing it. This build, however, I will probably do some invasions with this build when I'm not streaming. and I'll upload some videos. Like I said, I'm kind of bummed out because I lost a lot of really good footage I had of this build because of the PlayStation deciding to make the clips unwatchable for some reason. And as I said, I think there's a way to fix it. I just have to remember what I did last time. But yeah, absolutely love this build. So the stats I have is obviously 60 vigor. I think I've got like 24 endurance. I think I've got 20 something mind as well. And then the strength is like, it was 25. It might be higher now, but it's very, even if it's higher, it's not that much higher. Like the highest we're talking about is like in the low 30s for strength. And like I said, it's I think 50 arcane and 45 faith. And keep in mind that some of that faith is coming from the Two Fingers Talisman. If you have to choose between the Two Fingers Talisman and the Miracle Incantation Boosting Talisman, the Flock Canvas Talisman, I think is what it's called. If you have to choose between those, I'm pretty sure that the Two Fingers, the +5 faith, is always better unless you already have, you know, like 80 or 90 faith, and then maybe it's better to go with the other one. But this build uses Godfrey's Icon. It uses Millicent's Prosthesis, and it uses the Winged Sword Insignia, and it uses the Two Fingers Talisman. And some of those talismans I can sort of like flip-flop if I want to. I think I have enough faith where the talisman isn't necessary for casting any of my spells. Meaning having 40 faith gets me access to every spell that I'm casting. Every spell that I'm casting doesn't, it has less than 40 faith requirement. So I can swap that off if need be. But, for like the Blessed Dew Talisman, or the Crimson whatever thing that makes your flask heal for more. Like if I need to swap out a talisman, I can do that. But like I was saying, those are the stats. And if you go back and you watch the video, there will probably be parts where I open up my menu, and if you pause the game, you can probably get like a look at my stats. If you see them change, it's because at one point I think I had 60 arcane and like 30 or 35 faith, and then somebody watching me stream like pumped the numbers into Jerp's calculator, spell casting calculator. And we decided that like 50-45 was like the more optimal stat spread. And what that did was it gave me a few points to put somewhere else, and I just ended up putting them in strength. So I think I went from like 25 strength to like 30 strength, or maybe like 32 strength, something along those lines. And this build has a lot of mind, and probably the most mind of any character that I have made. And this build is just designed to cast a lot of spells. And most of these spells have pretty humble, FP requirements. But, Grail's Roar does, cost a little bit. When I was playing with Plasudasax Ruin, that does have, a pretty, substantial cost to the FP bar. And it's just nice to be able to just cast and cast and cast and cast and never have to stop casting to drink a blue flask. Something like that could be very annoying if you're fighting against, Star Shower or whatever. But I'm not trying to be annoying with it. I'm trying to be, fun and silly with it. Sometimes it's not really up to me how fun or silly I'm going to be. Sometimes it's sort of up to my opponent how fun and silly they're going to let me be. But, like I said, this build was not designed to be a build that just runs at you and casts Catch Flame. But it can be, if it needs to be. It wasn't designed to just spam Bestial Vitality, but it can do that if or not bestial vitality, bestial sling. It can do that if you make it. You know, if you're trying to make me do duels at a grace, but you want to heal and you've got twice as many flasks as me, you know, I'm not trying to one-shot you with Mariah's Executioner Sword, but like it can, and you know, I just, it's great. It's great. A lot of the times I make these characters, you know, I'm trying to fit them into like a theme of, you know, oh, this guy is like, you know, a fire guy, this guy's like a lightning guy, this is a madness guy. With this build, I'm just not doing that. This is actually very similar to like my quote-unquote mean build. It's not very mean, but it's mean by my standards. And it's a strength build with like 14 faith. This is like the faith version of that build. This is like the incantation version of that. I have a couple mean spells. This build can do a bunch of damage if it has to, but that's not the point of the build. The point of the build is to be a silly guy and try and do like some really cool incantation combos, which you know, you've seen a bunch if you've been watching the video. It's so much fun when you land this kind of stuff. It's really you know, the fact that magic is so much fun in Elden Ring, I'm still not over that. You know, I still love that. And the Arcane Int build that I'm making, I can already tell that I am also going to love that one as well. But that build is, I'm also going to have some mean stuff on that build, which it currently does not have at the moment. Also, like, this build is using every spell slot that you can use, with the exception of not wearing that talisman that you find in Noxtella. There's a talisman in Noxtella that gives you like an extra 3 or 4 spell slots. I'm not using that. But I went through the game, like I said, I went into New Game Plus for this build. I knew I was going to have to go into New Game Plus. I was laughing because the whole time I was thinking about going into New Game Plus, like, obviously I want to get whichever one of the 2 Millicent rewards that I didn't get in New Game. But it was mostly for that second Dragon Communion Seal. And I was laughing because that second Dragon Communion Seal is just right there at the start of the game. Like, as soon as you start New Game Plus, you turn right and boom, second Dragon Communion Seal. And, you know, now your Dragon Claw is doing 1,300 damage with one hand, so probably like 1,500 damage if you're dual wielding it, 1,600 damage. And then on top of that, if you proc that buff, the Millicent's buff, which is what's in the Wondrous Physic, I should also add. That's also what's in the Wondrous Physic. If you proc that, you know, you can do 2,400 damage with the Dragon Claw, which is hilarious and insane. I do have the Regalia of Eocade on this build, as well as the Ripple Halberd. Again, the Ripple Halberd, like, you really, really have to annoy me before I pull that thing out on this build. Because, you know, this wasn't meant to be that type of build. It's just that it can do it if it needs to. I also farmed a bunch of stuff for the sleep resin as well. So I can sleep resin the stupid Ripple Halberd. The Crescent Ripple Halberd, or whatever the hell it's called. The Regalia of Eocade, I like using that in invasions where there's 3 opponents. It doesn't require as much commitment to swing the straight sword versus the great sword, you know? So I like having that on this build, which is why, and Millicent's Prosthesis giving me exactly 18 dex works out great for that, so yeah, that's why I use it. But that's the build. I'll have more of it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Until then, later, y'all.